Part 7 of The Life and Death of Mr. Badman by John Bunyan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
Well, I yield. But pray, let us return again to Mr. Badman. You say that his father gave him a piece of money, that he might set up for himself.
Yes, his father did give him a piece of money, and he did set up, and almost as soon as set down again. For he was not long set up, but by his ill managing of his matters at home, together with his extravagant expenses abroad, he was got so far into debt, and had so little in his shop to pay, that he was hard put to it to keep himself out of prison. But when his creditors understood that he was about to marry, and in a fair way to get a rich wife, they said among themselves, "We will not be hasty with him. If he gets a rich wife, he will pay us all."
But how could he so quickly run out? For I perceive 'twas in little time, by what you say.
'Twas in a little time indeed. I think he was not above 2 years and a half of doing it. But the reason is apparent. For he being a wild young man, and now having the bridle loose before him, and being wholly subjected to his lusts and vices, he gave himself up to the way of his heart, and to the sight of his eye, forgetting that for all these things God will bring him to judgment. And he that doth thus, you may be sure, shall not be able long to stand on his legs. Besides, he had now an addiction of new companions. Companions, you must think, most like himself in manners, and so such that cared not who sunk, if they themselves might swim. These would often be haunting of him, and of his shop too when he was absent. They would commonly egg him to the alehouse, but yet make him jack pay for all. They would be borrowing also money of him, but take no care to pay again, except it was with more of their company, which also he liked very well, and so his poverty came like one that travelleth, and his want like an armed man. But all the while they studied his temper. He loved to be flattered, praised, and commended for wit, manhood, and personage, and this was like stroking him over the face. Thus they collogued with him, and got yet more and more into him, and so, like horse leeches, they drew away that little that his father had given him, and brought him quickly down, almost to dwell next door to the beggar.
Then was the saying of the wise man fulfilled, He that keepeth company with harlots, and a companion of fools, shall be destroyed.
Ay, and that too. A companion of riotous persons shameth his father. For he, poor man, had both grief and shame, to see how his son, now at his own hand, behaved himself in the enjoyment of those good things, in and under the lawful use of which he might have lived to God's glory, his own comfort and credit among his neighbours. But he that followeth vain persons shall have poverty enough. The way that he took led him directly into this condition. For who can expect other things of one that follows such courses? Besides, when he was in his shop, he could not abide to be doing. He was naturally given to idleness. He loved to live high, but his hands refused to labor. And what else can the end of such an one be, but that which Wiseman saith, The drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags.
But now, methinks, when he was brought thus low, he should have considered the hand of God that was gone out against him, and should have smote upon the breast, and have returned.
Consideration, good consideration, was far from him. He was as stout and proud now as ever in all his life, and was as high too in the pursuit of his sin, as when he was in the midst of his fullness. Only he went now like a tired jade. The devil had rid him almost off of his legs.
Well, but what did he do when all was almost gone?
2 things were now his play. 1, he bore all in hand by swearing and cracking and lying, that he was as well to pass as he was the first day he set up for himself, yea, that he had rather got than lost. And he had at his beck some of his companions that would swear to confirm it as fast as he.
This was double wickedness. 'Twas a sin to say it, and another to swear it.
That's true. But what evil is that he will not do, that is left of God, as I believe Mr. Badman was.
And what was the other thing?
Why, that which I hinted before, he was for looking out for a rich wife. And now I am come to some more of his invented, devised, designed, and abominable roguery, such that will yet declare him to be a most desperate sinner. The thing was this: a wife he wanted, or rather money. For as for a woman, he could have whores enow at his whistle. But as I said, he wanted money, and that must be got by a wife, or no way. Nor could he so easily get a wife neither, except he became an artist at the way of dissembling, nor would dissembling do among that people that could dissemble as well as he. But there dwelt a maid not far from him, that was both godly, and one that had a good portion. But how to get her, there lay all the craft. Well, he calls a council of some of his most trusty and cunning companions, and breaks his mind to them, to wit, that he had a mind to marry, and he also told them to whom. But, said he, how shall I accomplish my end? She is religious, and I am not. Then one of them made reply, saying, since she is religious, you must pretend to be so likewise, and that for some time before you go to her. Mark therefore whither she goes daily to hear, or do you go thither also. But there you must be sure to behave yourself soberly, and make as if you liked the word wonderful well. Stand also where she may see you, and when you come home, be sure that you walk the street very soberly, and go within sight of her. This done for a while, then go to her, and first talk of how sorry you are for your sins, and show great love to the religion that she is of, still speaking well of her preachers, and of her godly acquaintance, bewailing your hard hap, that it was not your lot to be acquainted with her and her fellow professors sooner. And this is the way to get her. Also you must write down sermons, talk of scriptures, and protest that you came a-wooing to her only because she is godly, and because you should count it your greatest happiness if you might but have such an one. As for her money, slight it. It will be never the further off. That's the way to come soonest at it, for she will be jealous at first that you come for her money. You know what she has, but make not a word about it. Do this, and you shall see if you do not entangle the lass. Thus was the snare laid for the poor honest maid, and she was quickly catched in his pit.
Why, did he take this counsel?
Did he? Yes, and after a while went as boldly to her, and that under a vizard of religion, as if he had been for honesty and godliness, one of the most sincere and upright-hearted in England. He observed all his points, and followed the advice of his counsellors, and quickly obtained her too. For natural parts he was tall and fair, and had plain but very good clothes on his back, and his religion was the more easily attained, for he had seen something in the house of his father and first master, and so could the more readily put himself into the form and show thereof. So he appointed his day, and went to her, as that he might easily do, for she had neither father nor mother to oppose. Well, when he was come, he had given her a civil compliment, to let her understand why he was come. Then he began and told her, that he had found in his heart a great deal of love to her person, and that of all the damsels in the world he had pitched upon her, if she thought fit to make her his beloved wife. The reasons, as he told her, why he had pitched upon her, were her religious and personal excellencies, and therefore entreated her to take his condition into her tender and loving consideration. As for the world, quoth he, I have a very good trade, and can maintain myself and family well, while my wife sits still on her seat. I have got thus and thus much already, and feel money come in every day, but that is not the thing that I aim at. 'Tis an honest and godly wife. Then he would present her with a good book or two, pretending how much good he had got by them himself. He would also be often speaking well of godly ministers, especially of those that he perceived she liked and loved most. Besides, he would be often telling her what a godly father he had, and what a new man he was also become himself. And thus did this treacherous dealer deal with his honest and good girl, to her great grief and sorrow, as afterward you shall hear.
But had the maid no friend to look after her?
Her father and mother were dead, and that he knew well enough, and so she was the more easily overcome by his naughty lying tongue. But if she had never so many friends, she might have been beguiled by him. It is too much the custom of young people now to think themselves wise enough to make their own choice, and that they need not ask counsel of those that are older and also wiser than they. But this is the great fault in them, and many of them have paid dear for it. Well, to be short, in little time Mr. Badman obtains his desire, gets this honest girl and her money, is married to her, brings her home, makes a feast, entertains her royally, but her portion must pay for all.
This was wonderful deceitful doings. A man shall seldom hear of the like.
By this his doing he showed how little he feared God, and what little dread he had of his judgments. For all this carriage and all these words were by him premeditated evil. He knew he lied, he knew he dissembled. Yea, he knew that he made use of the name of God, of religion, good men, and good books, but as a stalking horse, thereby the better to catch his game. In all this his glorious pretense of religion, he was but a glorious painted hypocrite, and hypocrisy is the highest sin that a poor carnal wretch can attain unto. It is also a sin that most dareth God, and that also bringeth the greater damnation. Now was he a whited wall, now was he a painted sepulchre, now was he a grave that appeared not, for this poor honest godly damsel little thought that both her peace and comfort and estate, and liberty and person and all, were going to her burial, when she was going to be married to Mr. Badman. And yet it was so. She enjoyed herself but little afterwards. She was as if she was dead and buried to what she enjoyed before.
Certainly some wonderful judgment of God must attend and overtake such wicked men as these.
You may be sure that they shall have judgment to the full, for all these things, when the day of judgment is come. But as for judgment upon them in this life, it doth not always come. No, not upon those that are worthy thereof. They that tempt God are delivered, and they that work wickedness are set up. But they are reserved to the day of wrath, and then for their wickedness God will repay them to their faces. The wicked is reserved to the day of destruction. They shall be brought forth to the day of wrath. Who shall declare his way to his face? And who shall repay him what he hath done? Yet shall he be brought to the grave, and remain in the tomb. That is, ordinarily they escape God's hand in this life, save only a few examples are made that others may be cautioned and take warning thereby. But at the day of judgment they must be rebuked for their evil with the lashes of devouring fire.
Can you give me no examples of God's wrath upon men that have acted this tragical wicked deed of Mr. Badman?
Yes, Hamer and Shechem, and all the men of their city, for attempting to make God and religion the stalking horse to get Jacob's daughters to wife, were together slain with the edge of the sword. A judgment of God upon them, no doubt, for their dissembling in that matter. All manner of lying and dissembling is dreadful, but to make God and religion a disguise, therewith to blind thy dissimulation from others' eyes, is highly provoking to the divine majesty. I knew one that dwelt not far off from our town, that got him a wife as Mr. Badman got his. But he did not enjoy her long, for one night as he was riding home from his companions, where he had been at a neighbouring town, his horse threw him to the ground, where he was found dead at break of day, frightfully and lamentably mangled with his fall, and besmeared with his own blood.
Well, but pray, return again to Mr. Badman. How did he carry it to his wife, after he was married to her?
Nay, let us take things along as we go. He had not been married but a little while, but his creditors came upon him for their money. He deferred them a little while, but at last things were come to that point that pay he must, or must do worse. So he appointed them a time, and they came for their money, and he paid them down with her money, before her eyes, for those goods that he had profusely spent among his whores long before, besides the portion that his father gave him, to the value of 200 pounds.
This beginning was bad. But what shall I say? 'Twas like Mr. Badman himself. Poor woman! This was but a bad beginning for her. I fear it filled her with trouble enough, as I think such a beginning would have done one perhaps much stronger than she.
Trouble? Aye, you may be sure of it. But now 'twas too late to repent. She should have looked better to herself, when being wary would have done her good. Her harms may be an advantage to others, that will learn to take heed thereby. But for herself she must take what follows, even such a life now as Mr. Badman her husband will lead her, and that will be bad enough.
This beginning was bad, and yet I fear it was but the beginning of bad.
You may be sure that it was but the beginning of badness, for other evils came on apace. As for instance, it was but a little while after he was married, but he hangs his religion upon the hedge, or rather dealt with it as men deal with their old clothes, who cast them off or leave them to others to wear. For his part he would be religious no longer. Now therefore he had pulled off his vizard, and began to show himself in his old shape, a base, wicked, debauched fellow. And now the poor woman saw that she was betrayed indeed. Now also his old companions began to flock about him, and to haunt his house and shop as formerly. And who with them but Mr. Badman? And who with him again but they? Now those good people that used to company with his wife began to be amatted and discouraged. Also he would frown and gloat upon them, as he abhorred the appearance of them, so that in little time he drove all good company from her, and made her sit solitary by herself. He also began now to go out at nights to those drabs who were his familiars before, with whom he would stay sometimes till midnight, and sometimes till almost morning, and then would come home as drunk as a swine. And this was the course of Mr. Badman. Now when he came home in this case, if his wife did but speak a word to him about where he had been, and why he had so abused himself, though her words were spoken in never so much meekness and love, then she was whore and bitch and jade, and 'twas well if she missed his fingers and heels. Sometimes also he would bring his punks home to his house, and woe be to his wife when they were gone, if she did not entertain them with all varieties possible, and also carry it lovingly to them. Thus this good woman was made by Badman, her husband, to possess nothing but disappointments as to all that he had promised her, or that she hoped to have at his hands. But that added pressing weight to all her sorrow was that as he had cast away all religion himself, so he attempted if possible to make her to do so too. He would not suffer her to go out to the preaching of the word of Christ, nor to the rest of his appointments, for the health and salvation of her soul. He would now taunt at and reflectingly speak of her preachers, and would receive, yea, raise scandals of them, to her very great grief and affliction. Now she scarce durst go to an honest neighbour's house, or have a good book in her hand, especially when he had his companions in his house, or had got a little drink in his head. He would also, when he perceived that she was dejected, speak tauntingly and mockingly to her in the presence of his companions, calling her his religious wife, his demure dame, and the like. Also he would make sport of her among his wanton ones abroad. If she did ask him, as sometimes she would, to let her go out to a sermon, he would in a currish manner reply, keep at home, and look to your business. We cannot live by hearing of sermons." If she still urged that he would let her go, then he would say to her, "Go if you dare." He would also charge her with giving of what he had to her ministers, when, vile wretch, he had spent it on his vain companions before. This was the life that Mr. Badman's good wife lived, within few months after he had married her.
This was a disappointment indeed.
A disappointment indeed as ever, I think, poor woman had. One would think that the knave might a little let her have had her will, since it was nothing but to be honest, and since she brought him so sweet, so lumping a portion, for she brought hundreds into his house. I say, one would think he should have let her had her own will a little, since she desired it only in the service and worship of God. But could she win him to grant her that? No, not a bit, if it would have saved her life. True, sometimes she would steal out when he was from home, on a journey or among his drunken companions, but with all privacy imaginable. And poor woman, this advantage she had. She carried it so to all her neighbors, that though many of them were but carnal, yet they would not betray her, or tell of her going out to the word, if they saw it, but would rather endeavor to hide it from Mr. Badman himself.
This carriage of his to her was enough to break her heart.
A disappointment indeed as ever, I think, poor woman had. One would think that the knave might a little let her have had her will, since it was nothing but to be honest, and since she brought him so sweet, so lumping a portion, for she brought hundreds into his house. I say, one would think he should have let her had her own will a little, since she desired it only in the service and worship of God. But could she win him to grant her that? No, not a bit, if it would have saved her life. True, sometimes she would steal out when he was from home, on a journey or among his drunken companions, but with all privacy imaginable. And poor woman, this advantage she had. She carried it so to all her neighbors, that though many of them were but carnal, yet they would not betray her, or tell of her going out to the word, if they saw it, but would rather endeavor to hide it from Mr. Badman himself.
This carriage of his to her was enough to break her heart.
It was enough to do it, indeed. Yea, it did effectually do it. It killed her in time. Yea, it was all the time a killing of her. She would oftentimes, when she sat by herself, thus mournfully bewail her condition. Woe is me that I sojourn in Meshech, and that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. My soul hath long time dwelt with them that hateth peace. O what shall be given unto thee, thou deceitful tongue? Or what shall be done unto thee, thou false tongue? I am a woman grieved in spirit. My husband has bought me and sold me for his lusts. 'Twas not me, but my money that he wanted. O that he had had it, so that I had had my liberty. This she said, not of contempt of his person, but of his conditions, and because she saw that by his hypocritical tongue he had brought her not only almost to beggary, but robbed her of the word of God.
End of Part 7. Part 8 of The Life and Death of Mr. Badman by John Bunyan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
It is a deadly thing, I see, to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. If this woman had had a good husband, how happily might they have lived together! Such an one would have prayed for her, taught her, and also would have encouraged her in the faith and ways of God. But now, poor creature, instead of this, there is nothing but the quite contrary.
It is a deadly thing indeed, and therefore by the word of God his people are forbid to be joined in marriage with them. Be not, saith it, unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? There can be no agreement where such matches are made. Even God himself hath declared the contrary from the beginning of the world. I, says he, will put enmity betwixt thee and the woman, betwixt thy seed and her seed. Therefore he saith in another place, they can mix no better than iron and clay. I say they cannot agree, they cannot be one, and therefore they should be aware at first, and not lightly receive such into their affections. God has often made such matches bitter, especially to his own. Such matches are, as God said of Eli's sons that were spared, to consume the eyes and to grieve the heart. O the wailing and lamentation that they have made that have been thus yoked, especially if they were such as would be so yoked against their light and good counsel to the contrary.
Alas, He deluded her with his tongue, and feigned reformation.
Well, well, she should have gone more warily to work. What if she had acquainted some of her best, most knowing and godly friends therewith? What if she had engaged a godly minister or two to have talked to Mr. Badman? Also, what if she had laid wait round about him, to espy if he was not otherwise behind her back than he was before her face? And besides, I verily think, since in the multitude of counselors there is safety, that if she had acquainted the congregation with it, and desired them to spend some time in prayer to God about it, and if she must have had him, to have received him as to his godliness, upon the judgment of others rather than her own, she knowing them to be godly and judicious and unbiased men, she had had more peace all her life after, than to trust her own poor, raw, womanish judgment, as she did. Love is blind, and will see nothing amiss, where others may see 100 faults. Therefore I say she should not have trusted to her own thoughts in the matter of his goodness. As to his person, there she was fittest to judge, because she was to be the person pleased. But as to his godliness, there the Word was the fittest judge, and they that could best understand it, because God was therein to be pleased. I wish that all young maidens will take heed of being beguiled with flattering words, with feigning and lying speeches, and take the best way to preserve themselves from being bought and sold by wicked men, as she was, lest they repent with her, when, as to this, repentance will do them no good, but for their unadvisedness go sorrowing to their graves.
Well, things are past with this poor woman, and cannot be called back. Let others beware, by her misfortunes, lest they also fall into her distress.
That is the thing that I say. Let them take heed, lest for their unadvisedness the smart as this poor woman has done. And methinks that they that yet are single persons, and that are tempted to marry to such as Mr. Badman, would to inform and warn themselves in this matter, before they entangle themselves, but go to some that already are in the snare, and ask them how it is with them, as to the suitable or unsuitableness of their marriage, and desire their advice. Surely they would ring such appeal in their ears about the inequality, unsuitableness, disadvantages, and disquietments, and sins that attend such marriages, that would make them beware as long as they live. But the bird in the air knows not the notes of the bird in the snare, until she comes thither herself. Besides, to make up such marriages, Satan and carnal reason and lust, or at least inconsiderateness, has the chiefest hand. And where these things bear sway, designs, though never so destructive, will go headlong on, and therefore I fear that but little warning will be taken by young girls at Mr. Badman's wife's afflictions.
But are there no dissuasive arguments to lay before such, to prevent their future misery?
Yes, there is the law of God that forbiddeth marriage with unbelievers. These kind of marriages are also condemned even by irrational creatures. 1. It is forbidden by the law of God both in the Old Testament and in the New. 1. In the Old, thou shalt not make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. Deuteronomy 7:4, 5, and 2. In the New Testament it is forbidden. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Let them marry to whom they will, only in the Lord. Here now is a prohibition plainly forbidding the believer to marry with the unbeliever. Therefore they should not do it. Again, these unwarrantable marriages are, as I may so say, condemned by irrational creatures, who will not couple but with their own sort. Will the sheep couple with a dog, the partridge with a crow, or the pheasant with an owl? No, they will strictly tie up themselves to those of their own sort only. Yea, it sets all the world a-wondering, when they see or hear the contrary. Man only is most subject to wink at and allow of these unlawful mixtures of men and women, because man only is a sinful beast, a sinful bird, Therefore he above all will take upon him by rebellious action to answer, or rather to oppose and violate the law of his God and Creator. Nor shall these or other interrogatories, what fellowship, what concord, what agreement, what communion can there be in such marriages, be counted of weight, or thought worth the answering by him. But further, the dangers that such do commonly run themselves into should be to others a dissuasive argument to stop them from doing the like. For besides the distresses of Mr. Badman's wife, many that have had very hopeful beginnings for heaven have, by virtue of their mischiefs that have attended these unlawful marriages, miserably and fearfully miscarried. Soon after such marriages, conviction, the first step toward heaven, hath ceased. Prayer, the next step toward heaven, hath ceased. Hungerings and thirstings after salvation, another step towards the kingdom of heaven, have ceased. In a word, such marriages have estranged them from the Word, from their godly and faithful friends, and have brought them again into a carnal company, among carnal friends, and also into carnal delights, where and with whom they have, in conclusion, both sinfully abode and miserably perished. And this is one reason why God hath forbidden this kind of unequal marriages. For they, saith he, meaning the ungodly, will turn away from thy Son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy you suddenly. Now mark, there were some in Israel that would, notwithstanding this prohibition, venture to marry to the heathens and unbelievers. But what followed? They served their idols. They sacrificed their sons and daughters unto devils. Thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a-whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of the Lord kindled against his people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance.
But let's return again to Mr. Badman. Had he any children by his wife?
Yes, 7.
I doubt they were but badly brought up.
One of them loved its mother dearly, and would constantly hearken to her voice. Now that child she had the opportunity to instruct in the principles of Christian religion, and it became a very gracious child. But that child Mr. Badman could not abide. He would seldom afford it a pleasant word, but would scowl and frown upon it, speak churlishly and doggedly to it. And though as to nature it was the most feeble of the 7, yet it oftenest felt the weight of its father's fingers. 3 of his children did directly follow his steps, and began to be as vile as, in his youth, he was himself. The other that remained became a kind of mongrel professors, not so bad as their father, nor so good as their mother, but were betwixt them both. They had their mother's notions, and their father's actions, and were much like those that you read of in the book of Nehemiah. These children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people.
What you say in this matter is observable, and, if I take not my mark amiss, it often happeneth after this manner, where such unlawful marriages are contracted.
It sometimes doth so, and the reason with respect to their parents is this: where the one of the parents is godly, and the other ungodly and vile, though they can agree in begetting of children, yet they strive for their children when they are born. The godly parent strives for the child, and by prayers, counsel, and good examples, labors to make it holy in body and soul, and so fit for the kingdom of heaven. But the ungodly would have it like himself, wicked and base and sinful, and so they both give instructions accordingly. Instructions, did I say? Yea, and examples too, according to their minds. Thus the godly, as Hannah, is presenting her Samuel unto the Lord. But the ungodly, like them that went before them, are for offering their children to Moloch, to an idol, to sin, to the devil, and to hell. Thus one hearkeneth to the law of their mother, and is preserved from destruction. But as for the other, as their fathers did, so do they. Thus did Mr. Badman and his wife part some of their children betwixt them. But as for the other 3 that were as 'twere mongrels betwixt both, they were like unto those that you read of in Kings. They feared the Lord, but served their own idols. They had, as I said, their mother's notions, and I will add profession too, but their father's lusts and something of his life. Now their father did not like them, because they had their mother's tongue, and the mother did not like them, because they had still their father's heart and life. Nor were they indeed fit company for good or bad. The good would not trust them because they were bad. The bad would not trust them because they were good. Viz., the good would not trust them because they were bad in their lives, and the bad would not trust them because they were good in their words. So they were forced with Esau to join in affinity with Ishmael, to wit, to look out a people that were hypocrites like themselves, and with them they marched and lived and died.
Poor woman! She could not but have much perplexity.
Yea, and poor children that ever they were, sent into the world as the fruit of the loins, and under the government of such a father as Mr. Badman.
You say right, for such children lie almost under all manner of disadvantages. But we must say nothing, because this also is the sovereign will of God.
We may not by any means object against God, yet we may talk of the advantages and disadvantages that children have by having for their parents such as are either godly or the contrary.
You say right. We may so. And pray now, since we are about it, speak something in brief unto it, that is, unto this, what advantage those children have above others, that have for their parents such as indeed are godly.
So I will, only I must first premise these 2 or 3 things. 1. They have not the advantage of election for their fathers' sakes. 2. They are born as others, the children of wrath, though they come of godly parents. 3. Grace comes not unto them as an inheritance, because they have godly parents. These things premised, I shall now proceed. 1. The children of godly parents are the children of many prayers. They are prayed for before and prayed for after they are born, and the prayer of a godly father and godly mother doth much. 2. They have the advantage of what restraint is possible from what evils their parents see them inclinable to, and that is a second mercy. 3. They have the advantage of godly instruction, and of being told which be and which be not the right ways of the Lord. 4. They have also those ways commended unto them, and spoken well of in their hearing, that are good. 5. Such are also what may be kept out of evil company, from evil books, and from being taught the way of swearing, lying, and the like, as Sabbath-breaking, and mocking at good men and good things, and this is a very great mercy. 6. They have also the benefit of a godly life set before them doctrinally by their parents, and that doctrine backed with a godly and holy example, and all these are very great advantages. Now, all these advantages the children of ungodly parents want, and so are more in danger of being carried away with the error of the wicked. For ungodly parents neither pray for their children, nor can they heartily instruct them. They do not, after godly manner, restrain them from evil, nor do they keep them from evil company. They are not grieved at, nor yet do they forewarn their children to beware of such evil actions that are abomination to God, and to all good men. They let their children break the Sabbath, swear, lie, be wicked and vain. They commend not to their children an holy life, nor set a good example before their eyes. No, they do in all things contrary, estranging of their children what they can, from the love of God and all good men, so soon as they are born. Therefore it is a very great judgment of God upon children to be the offspring of base and ungodly men.
Well, but before we leave Mr. Badman's wife and children, I have a mind, if you please, to inquire a little more after one thing, the which I am sure you can satisfy me in.
What is that?
You said a while ago that this Mr. Badman would not suffer his wife to go out to hear such godly ministers as she liked, but said, if she did, she had as good never come home any more. Did he often carry it thus to her?
He did say so. He did often say so. This I told you then, and had also then told you more, but that other things put me out.
Well said. Pray, therefore, now go on.
So I will. Upon a time she was on a Lord's Day for going to hear a sermon, and Mr. Badman was unwilling she should. But she at the time, it seems, did put on more courage than she was wont, and therefore after she had spent upon him a great many fair words and entreaties, if perhaps she might have prevailed by them, but all to no purpose at all. At last she said she would go, and rendered this reason for it: I have an husband, but also a God. My God has commanded me, and that upon pain of damnation, to be a continual worshipper of him, and that in the way of his own appointments. I have an husband, but also a soul, and my soul ought to be more unto me than all the world besides. This soul of mine I will look after, care for, and, if I can, provide it and heaven for its habitation. You are commanded to love me, as you love your own body, and so do I love you. But I tell you true, I prefer my soul before all the world, and its salvation I will seek. At this, first he gave her an ugly wish, and then fell into a fearful rage, and sware moreover that if she did go, he would make both her and all her damnable brotherhood, for so he was pleased to call them, to repent their coming thither.
But what should he mean by that?
You may easily guess what he meant. He meant he would turn informer, and so either weary out of those she loved from meeting together to worship God, or make them pay dearly for their so doing. The which if he did, he knew it would vex every vein of her tender heart.
But do you think Mr. Badman would have been so base?
Truly he had malice and enmity enough in his heart to do it. Only he was a tradesman. Also he knew that he must live by his neighbours. And so he had that little wit in his anger, that he refrained himself and did it not. But as I said, he had malice and envy enough in his heart to have made him do it. Only he thought it would worst him in his trade. Yet these three things he would be doing. 1. He would be putting of others on to molest and abuse her friends. 2. He would be glad when he heard that any mischief befell them. 3. And would laugh at her when she saw her troubled for them. And now I have told you Mr. Badman's way as to this.
End of Part 8.